about another minute. Again, the question is, what is writing to you? So even though the topic for today is writing is, what is writing to you? We'll give it a few more moments, but what is writing to you? So even though the topic is writing is, before we get into all this deep discussion, I want you to think, based again on what you've read, what you might have written, what you've seen, what is writing to you. And again, don't worry about giving the perfect answer, you give your honest answer. Because chances are, some of you might think the same thing, some of you might think something totally different. For some, it might expand your horizons, expand your boundaries. Some of you might be like, I'm just gonna stay in this little box. So again, what is writing to you? So we'll take about another 30 seconds and we're gonna start with our conversation along those lines. And again, not looking for the perfect answer, looking for your answer. Okay, so even though we have a couple of people that might be still working, who would like to get us started off in regards to what is writing to you? So whether you stand up and share, share with us again who you are, where you're based out of, and what is writing to you. So who'd like to get us started? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Gloria Moon. I live here in Winder. I've written writing is a journal of travel and learning, because when I travel, I like to journal. Also, writing is words in a jar, because I like to, when I do my devotional, sometimes I just pick out words and I write them on a piece of paper and I put them in a jar, and sometimes I put them on an index card. And then sometimes when I go by a church sign, they have inspirational phrase, I write it on a piece of paper.
That's creative, because so what you're doing to a degree, that's a form of, how many people are familiar with affirmations? You've heard daily affirmations. So to a degree, that's what you're doing. Definitely. How many people have thought about writing in the way that Ms. Moon explained? How many of you or what you heard is like, hey, I never looked at it like that? How many of you had those types of things pop up? Who else would like to share what is writing to you? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Artist. I'm from Winder. To me, writing is a passion and an emotional outlet for me. I have a creative spirit, and I love to express myself through storytelling and wordplay.
Ooh, run that back one more time for us, please.
Writing is a passion and an emotional outlet for me.
Let's pause right there. How many of you have ever written something in that manner, in an emotional outlet, whether it's a poem, whether it's that note when you drive around, or whether it's, for those of you that have like the old school composition books, how many of you have used writing for that, let's say, emotional expression? Raise your hand if that's been you. Keep going with what you share.
I have a creative spirit, and I love to express myself through storytelling and wordplay.
Okay, expression. How many of you have sometimes written for self-expression or self-definition? Who am I? Who are you? How many of you have done something along those lines? And how many of you have found that creative spirit or energy by doing something along those lines? Raise your hand if that is you. And how many, just from the two people that we've heard today, are starting to look at writing just a little bit differently than what you normally do? Raise your hand if that is you. Okay. Who else would like to build on this body of work that's sitting right here in this room? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I wrote that writing is medicine and that it's necessary and inevitable.
Wow, medicine. How many of you have heard writing can be therapeutic? Heck yeah. And we've already heard elements about that. And what was the last part again?
Necessary and inevitable.
Necessary and inevitable. How many of you feel that writing is still a necessary tool for our day to day, whether how we communicate, how we share, how we exchange, how we take in information? And regardless of how technology has advanced, you're still going to have what? An essential command of writing, which makes it relevant. This is good stuff. This is coming from the genius in this room. Who else would like to share a little bit of genius?
It's not genius, but you kind of started going in my direction, because I said, at this point in my life, writing is email. I'm sorry. But communicating professionally so that the smile on my face comes across in words.
Wow. You know what? I would love to get an email from you. Because sometimes some people haven't mastered that, about still having that buzz or that energy. And think about it. How many of us in here understand that we feed off of energy? If it's positive energy coming in, it's positive energy coming out. If it's negative energy coming in, if it's negative energy coming out. And who sometimes is in control of how we share and exchange that energy? That's right. It's all between our left and our right ears. And you just said something that's very powerful. Your goal each and every time to write that email is still have someone take away some type of smile on their face, regardless of the topics that you're covering. It's like, okay, we might have a couple bumps in the road, but here's where we're trying to get. So let's put our energy to where we're trying to go. That's huge. How many of you have thought about writing in that way? Leaving that type of, have you heard the term footprint? So in a way, each and every time you're sending an email, your goal is to leave what? As positive a footprint as possible. Even when we've written about some things that are challenging, it's still what? Light at the end of the tunnel. And no, it's not an oncoming car or oncoming train, but seriously, light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, these are great ideas. Who else has a great idea that they'd like to share?
I'll share. That was the question that made me.
Okay, what is writing to you?
Writing to me is like poetry. It's like rhythm in my mind when I write. It's laughter, it's hope. It feels like a smile, and it's powerful, and it works in action. Poetry of the heart, the mindset, dance of play of words and thoughts.
Wow, so even in there, how many of you heard creativity or creatives? The hot term now is creative, right? Everybody's been creative. How many of you finger painted as a kid? That's creative, because the only thing you had to use was what? Your finger and whatever paint, and come up with something. That still takes creativity. You think about poetry, and think about like that overlap with poetry and music. All of us have some type of song that speaks to us. For me, it's the work of Marvin Gaye, stuff from the late 60s and early 70s that's still speaking to things today, making it relevant. Or how many of you in classes ever did a haiku poem before? That's not the biggest poem, it's not the longest poem, but it can pack a mighty big punch based on what you're talking about. So it's elements of the creative, expressive, some things are overlapping in here. So when you see when I threw the question writing is, and I just made that adjustment, what is writing to you? Can everyone see what's been shared that, yeah, there's something to that? And does it mean you always have to go in that direction? Not necessarily, but can you go in that direction? Yes, you can. So writing, think about what we've just talked about with writing is. Yes, it's communication. I'm speaking with you, you're speaking with me, we're sharing and exchanging. Yes, communication. It's also expression. Especially sometimes when you have all this stuff bottled up, and you don't necessarily want to blow up a city block. So you want to go ahead and put it on a pen and a pad, or type it in your notes, or type it in your tablet. So you're articulating what is running through your head, but then you're seeing, how can I redirect my energy to where I can still leave with a smile on my face, a sense of hope, a sense of encouragement, a sense of inspiration. We talked about creativity, and creativity is in each and every one of us. Whether it's this big masterpiece or this big mini-series, or even a simple statement, I am, we are. That's writing, and that's power. That's power in words. And going a little bit on the other end of the spectrum, like they say, there's power what? There's power in the tongue, right? So we have to be real cognizant of what we say, how we say it. Sometimes we do have to be raw. Sometimes we do have to be polished. Sometimes you do have to use whatever allegories and all these types of things. And sometimes you have to come out and tell it. But writing, I think all of us in here can see how important it is, how relevant it is. It's something that's not going out of style anytime soon. How we choose to deliver can depend on what's going on with us, what we see around us, where we're trying to go, what we're trying to do, how we're trying to make sense out of stuff that doesn't make sense, our self-image, our self-worth, speaking to areas of concern, or just when you've had that foolhardy moment, like, you know, a lot of us with Salt and Pepper have had some foolhardy moments. Don't be fooled, even though we're sophisticated and mature. We've done some dumb stuff, trust me. We won't talk about all about it, but just know we have. So if we've survived, you all can survive through it too. But writing is, and it's almost like it is what you make it. It is what you're open to exploring, and it can be that process to get from point A to point B. So everything that all of you share, that's important, because that's what's important to you. But hopefully what you've heard from each other gives you some other ways to creatively challenge yourself. So the person that doesn't journal, maybe every once in a while you will. Or when you're trying to redirect your energy, it's like, I know I feel some kind of way, but we're not gonna necessarily go there today. Let's see what can we do to find that area of overlap, or we can all come away with something. That's big. And everybody in here has the capacity to do it in their own way. Does everybody agree with that? Having said all that, now we'll go ahead and pivot to what writing is to me. And the fact that, as you can probably tell, I'm the youngest in the family, so I'm kind of sort of all over the place, which is why my work is kind of sort of creatively all over the place. But there's a calculated thing behind it. Deeper is the very first book that I published back in February 2017. And the title, Deeper Than Your Deepest Sleep, Thoughts on Love with Snorton, actually came by accident. Many of you in this room are familiar with the poet, actress, community advocate, all that and then some, Dr. Maya Angelou. How many of you have heard that name before? I was fortunate to where she was actually a faculty member where I went to college, Wake Forest University, for a little bit over 30 years. And when she transitioned, they did her memorial service on the campus of Wake Forest University at Wake Chapel, which is like the centerpiece of campus. So I was fortunate to be one of the people who got invited, and you can call my mom and dad. I sent them my parking ticket and my program, and there's photos of it on the internet. But the funny thing is, the title is really based on an accident, because when I got my invite was in the name of Joseph. Now, I don't know about you, but my name is Andrew. You can see messing up Andrew to Adam, Andrew to Alex, Joseph. Let's just say they weren't drinking the coffee. That's all I can tell you. So, of course, me being the silly person that I am, asked my parents if there was something that they needed to tell me, and they almost smacked me from here to next month. But I did a little bit of research, and there really is an extended family member way down the line by the name of Joseph. So the book of poetry that I did is based on conversations with him about the energy of love through the lens of family, community, people in your life, people no longer in your life, self-image, things along those lines. But unlike a lot of poetry, the beginning of each chapter is the portion of the actual conversation, because we know, as creative as we can be, sometimes we don't bring everybody with us. So by doing that preview, the reader knows the context, and now when they get into the poem, they can draw connections. So that's basically how that first book came into being. The second book, 9 Stories of Faith, Volume 1, operates through 2 lenses. The primary lens is that all of us in here are dealing with something, whether big or small, all of us are dealing with something. But some people are dealing with something each and every day. And some people are dealing with some serious gut-punching situations. So the people I interviewed opened up about living with a physical health issue like multiple sclerosis, a mental health issue like bipolar disorder, where before they were probably diagnosed, tried to kill themselves multiple times. Then on the other end of the spectrum, an individual that before he decided to propose, it's like, am I really ready to take on this level of responsibility? So it's a talk with people about what their biggest daily life challenge is. But in addition to their respective faith, which is a secondary piece, the majority of people I interviewed are of Christian background, but there's one family I interviewed of Islamic background and another individual of Hinduism. But talking about how through the lens of their respective faith, the best practices they use in health and wellness, their support network, and how they change their way of thinking, they still live positive and powerful lives. So it's really those 2 themes. The primary theme is before someone who's really in a dark place feels like there's no hope and they do something really detrimental to themselves or the people around them, pause and pump your brakes. And it doesn't mean you have to problem solve exactly the way that they do, but there could be a way to better solve your problem before doing something. Then when the smoke clears, you're like, what did I do? And then the secondary piece is we know sometimes there's misconceptions about what is and what isn't. And even in the very beginning of 9 Stories of Faith, I used the traditional Islamic greeting, wa salam alaikum, alaikum assalam, peace unto you, peace back. To use that as a parallel for in some churches when you're doing expressions of friendship or passing the peace, what are you doing? Peace unto you, peace back. And it's not as a way to convert, but it's a way to see, hey, look, if there are overlapping principles here, how can we apply these to our day-to-day? Maybe that means there's better advocacy when it comes to areas of concern relating to gender or orientation or any other, we'll say, social disconnect that's out there. So maybe it means it's a bigger pool of people who are advocating, who understand these are things that we have in common, and if we work in this lane, we can probably make some type of progress. And the more we do that, now we expand the boundaries. So we break down some of those barriers regarding demographics on ethnic background or gender or socioeconomic status or what have you. That's it, 2-fold. Then there's Nothing Minor, which is kind of an ode to my love for the game of baseball. As a little kid, I would sit with my dad on Saturdays for game of the week, and we'd order a pizza, he'd have his pizza and 21 and older beverage. I'd have my pizza and my Kool-Aid, wondering when I could have that 21 and older beverage. But it was part bonding with my dad, but to be honest, one of the best takeaways I have from baseball, that's what helped me learn how to do math. You think about batting average, what is that? That's a ratio, the number of hits you have compared to the number of at-bats you have. You think about other things, winning percentage, the number of wins you have compared to the number of games you played. Another thing learning about that is you can still be a success even though you fail the majority of the time, because think about it. A 300 hitter in baseball is considered a great hitter. That means 70% of the time they're either striking out or making an out. So if they can be considered great when you mess up 70% of the time, how great do you think you can be? And what's really cool about Nothing Minor, I'm very fortunate that about half the players I interviewed are of African-American background, because on the major league level, I think it's less than 10% of all players are of African-American background. A number of the players I interviewed are from Metro Atlanta, and there are a few who are actually on major league rosters. So one of the players I interviewed, Tristan Casas, who was a 19-year-old at the time that I interviewed him, he's the starting first baseman for the Boston Red Sox. Tyler Stevenson, who is from Metro Atlanta, he's the starting catcher for the Cincinnati Reds. His best friend, who is a teammate with him, not only when they played minor league ball, but when they played with and against each other in Metro Atlanta, Taylor Trammell's with the Seattle Mariners system. Touki Toussaint, who some people remember played with the Braves, he's shuttled around to a couple of teams, but now he's with the Chicago White Sox. So in addition to the game recaps and player interviews, it's a little bit more. It's a sprinkling of history because there's a section on the Negro Southern League Museum in Birmingham, Alabama, which I would suggest make a road trip to Birmingham. There's a lot of history there in general, not only with the museum, but right across the street, the church, unfortunately, where the bombing took place, but with the Negro Southern League's museum, it interlocks with the baseball park where the Birmingham Barons play. The Birmingham Barons, who are affiliated with the Chicago White Sox, their name comes from the Birmingham Black Barons of the Negro Southern League Museum. So every time they take the field in Birmingham, they're paying ode and homage to the Negro League team that was there. And there's also an interview with one of the umpire supervisors who, ironically, we were born in the same place in Illinois, and when his parents were alive, his parents went to the same church that my parents went to in Bloomington. He's now based in Denver, Colorado, and he had a career as a major league umpire. He is now a supervisor, so he does a lot of training and reviews of the umpires. So that's not only a talk from that perspective, but different pathways to sports. And like we were talking about earlier, the top umps in Major League Baseball make about $500,000 a year. And the average career is a little bit over 20 years. So for people who are interested in sports, it's more than just being on the field. And not only that, there's great contributions from Gwinnett's best photographer, Emmy Rose Photography. So that's other pathways. And then the most recent book, Quotes and Notes, Something's on the Horizon. Everybody in here clearly likes to think based on the deep thoughts that you gave earlier. So the quotes I have, all of them are original quotes except for one that I borrowed from my grandmother. Part of it is think piece, but it's not about me coming up with these deep thoughts. And it's not necessarily about me explaining the logic and rationale. It's a space in there for you to see whether you agree, whether you disagree, whether you want to go deeper, or whether you want to go in another direction. And I'll be honest, a book that inspired me to do quotes and notes is a book called As a Man Thinketh. So even though the title says As a Man Thinketh, it's applicable to men and women. And we understand what you put in here is eventually going to come out in your thoughts, words, and actions. Feed your mind constructive things will come out. Feed your mind some garbage is going to come out. And so these are quotes I came up that have helped me out, and I'll admit with all my writing, it's not just writing for an audience or for a topic, and it's not just helping other people, it's a self-check for me as well. So it's not me, I'm the brilliant. It's bigger than just that. So by having that space, now all of a sudden it's an opportunity to pause and reboot. Now it's an opportunity to rethink or revisit and think about what we talked about earlier. Some of you already had your ideas of what writing is, but based on what you've heard from your peers, it's giving you more tools for your toolbox. So even if your writing necessarily doesn't go that direction, you can go there every once in a while. And based on what I've done, poetry to self-help to sports to think piece, I've kind of hopped around. And I'll probably continue hopping around. Will I do another sports book? Probably. Will I do another poetry book? Probably. Will I do another motivation, inspiration, life challenges? Probably. Will I do something else that's a think piece, maybe when I get older and get a little bit wiser? Yeah, I'll come up with another set of things. But it comes back to that central theme of what writing is. All of you have an idea of what writing is to you. You've heard what writing is to other people, and it lets you know that you can, quote, walk and chew gum at the same time. You can operate in your preferred lane, but just like when you're driving, put your turn signal on. You can slide to the left. Uh-oh, that shuffle, slide to the right. And you can do those types of things. And finally, you never know where writing is going to take you. And that kind of leads into the coffee piece, which really, that seed, no pun intended, got planted 5 years ago. The way that happened is I just finished doing a Mississippi festival, and I spent time in southwestern Kentucky visiting relatives. Already had plans to go to Louisville, Kentucky, because my cousin, who just passed a couple months ago, his promotions company would host one of the major concerts. So I already had passes for that, looking forward to it. I still had books in the ride. I'm like, hey, I want to try and do another book signing. So using the power of technology, I reached out to the alumni club in Louisville and asked for suggestions for a coffee house. Come on, books and coffee, kind of makes sense. So they gave me about 4 or 5 coffee houses, but the only coffee house that responded was Fonte's Coffee. And I heard directly from the owner by email an hour after I left a phone message, like, you just come. Had a great time, great signing, nice intimate spot in East Louisville. And we just, you keep in touch. How you doing, how you doing, how you doing, how you doing? Hey, how you doing, how you doing? No big deal. Until this time last year, and he's like, hey, how open would you be to doing a coffee collaboration? I'm like, well, as long as I have feedback and input, let's see what happens. So in October of last year is when we dropped a medium roast. And you'll notice the older bags are kind of nice and cool, but these are like glossy. So like at night you can find this, put a flashlight, you'll find your bag. So we launched that in October of last year. And then the light roast is what we dropped over Mother's Day weekend. At the end of this month, we'll drop our decaf, and then during the holidays, we are going to do a limited run of a bourbon infused coffee. So that'll be just before Thanksgiving, right after Christmas. We're fortunate the way that we did it to help control people's price points is that when people order 60 or more directly from Fonte's Coffee, it's free shipping. So that definitely saves you some money. There's usually 2 to 3 days shipping. And another thing that we've done is making sure not only do we have the grading for the roast color, but you also have when the roast date. So would you be so kind to read the roasting date for me, please?
Oh, this part, okay. I was looking at the wrong thing. August 3rd?
Yeah, so what's today? 10th, so this was roasted a week ago. So we try to get the freshest batch. And one thing that we're doing, yes, we're gradually expanding, like in Louisville and then Metro Atlanta, but for online, our initial phase is when people check out, they have the option to donate a percentage of their sales to a Louisville-based nonprofit, a Metro Atlanta-based nonprofit, and then a nationwide nonprofit. Originally, our plan was to do it nationwide for any 501c3. It just so happened the provider that we were gonna work with jacked up their hosting price, and we're like, hey, this isn't gonna work. So we're scaling it a little bit differently. But our goal is to make sure that we rotate in regards to the nonprofits that are supported. So if you or someone you know knows a 501c3 that you think for a good 6 to 8 week stretch could possibly benefit, get in contact with me, because we're gonna rotate out those nonprofits. The goal is ultimately to make sure that when people check out, there's a nationwide database, and if there's a 501c3 near you that you wanna support, that you can do so. Right now, based on our provider, we have to do it on a limited basis, but we are hoping to expand that. And another nice thing in regards to expansions, they're also a venue that has all my books available, so it's definitely a blessing. So that is the talk that I have. I want to open up the floor for questions, whether what does writing mean to me, or how the book ideas evolve, or where I've been able to speak, where I'm speaking next, or just based on my, quote, 6-year journey as a published author, what are things that I've learned that might help someone who's considering doing the same or doing something differently, even on the audiobook end, which I didn't really talk too much about, but I'm open to it. So please, whatever questions you have, do not be afraid to ask them. If I know it, I'll tell you. If I don't know it, I will tell you that too. Says no problem.
What is writing mean to you?
Oh gosh, what does writing mean to me? Man, look, I'll give you a simplified version. It's communication. It's a way for me to talk with and listen to. It is expression, whether the positive, the not so positive, the optimistic, the pessimistic. Re-examining or reimagining things. Topics that people don't want to talk about. How do we have a better conversation with those? Because you can only sweep so much stuff under the rug. It's a checkpoint, how far you've come, how far you need to go. It's a challenge. Each of these books took different time frames. This first book, I was going through a breakup at the time. It took me like 2 months to get it done. This took me a year, that took me a year, and this took me about a year and a half when I think about start to finish. So writing is a challenge because sometimes it's real fluid, sometimes not so much. You start and stop and rip stuff up and you leave it alone for a couple of days. Those types of things happen. It's not always automatic, but that's okay because every work, all of you in here know, every work has its life of its own. So those are some of the things that writing means to me, but I think another thing, I get a chance to meet great people like you. And I will say this, when I think about where I've been able to go and what I've been able to do since I've been a published author, man, it's like my magic carpet ride. Like for real. If you had told me, I did my first book in 2017, the first major book festival I did was the Mississippi Book Festival, August of that year. I had to marinate on that for a minute. That doesn't happen to everybody. I've been able, this is my second time coming here. I've been able to do festivals or signs or events in Chicago at the DuSable Museum, Dallas, Texas at Pan-African Connections, where part of what they do is they have a community day every Saturday where people can get free groceries and whatever. I've spoken at my alma mater, Wake Forest University. I did 2 book signings on the same day back at home. I did a book signing where I grew up in elementary school in the morning, drove down an hour and a half back to where I did, where I went to high school. There's people I've been able to meet that I know I would not have met. That's pretty cool. That is pretty deep. When I sit there and think about it, I met this person, that person. So it is kind of like the magic carpet ride for me. And the beautiful thing is, I'm still scratching the surface. Like I put in my quotes and notes. It's like as great as the work you've done, you haven't done your greatest work. And that's not to demean or belittle what you've done, but everything you do is a springboard for what's next. Me starting in 2017, part of the what's next was the coffee piece. Me writing is what landed me the partnership with the Status Network that I'm on Breaker on. And even when I did the DuSable Museum last year, the event that I did, I'm like the only person that was there that wasn't from Chicago, Milwaukee, or Detroit. 2 tables down from me is Dr. Christian Gregory. Some of you might have known who his father is, the late Dick Gregory. And he was supposed to debut the posthumous book the very next weekend at the Schomburg, but he debuted it at the DuSable. And all because of what? Of me putting both feet in back in February 2017. Yeah, that's pretty cool. This kind of magic carpet ride. Don't worry, I'm not going to get like on a carpet and start running and jumping because I know I'm going to crash, but you guys get the idea. But great question. What other questions do you have just about the topics we covered or the topics I covered or whatever? Please feel free to share it. Ask it. It's not a problem.
What is it that you do with audiobooks?
Audiobooks. Okay, good question. So, audiobooks. I actually have an audiobook series called the Author's Mixtape, and the concept behind it kind of ties in with what you shared about how you have, the little slips, and as you go around, you'll go ahead and write stuff down. So the way the Author's Mixtape started off is it is a poetry, spoken word, music series. It is all freestyle, meaning everything that we do start to finish is in studio sessions. So that's collaborative with my partners at Third Level Entertainment, as well as Canvas Major Digital. So literally, like the very first audiobook, the very first edition that we did, the owner of Third Level Entertainment has 2 daughters who are now in high school, but they're in middle school at the time. What they did, they wrote down topics on 20 slips of paper, and I'd pick one out of the hat. I'd go in the booth and make up something based on that. So that's how we did the first audio book. And so now what we do is we write down the topics before we come in, but we don't do anything until we're actually recording. So in each 2-hour session, it's really honestly making it up as we go along. So we do all the recording, and then what'll happen is for the tracks that we'll do music accompaniments with, they'll go back and go ahead and remix and master that. But the primary recordings are done within a 2-hour studio session. And unlike a number of people who do audiobooks and put them on Audible, which is a great platform, we focus more on the music side. So what happens is, if you're familiar with streaming from platforms like Tidal, Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, Shazam, Deezer, Amazon, Apple Music, Google Play, there's like 300, don't ask me all 300, I only know about 10 or 15, but we use more of the music format. and then we borrow a lot from what you see in the music industry. So, in the music industry, you write, you get songwriting credits, people sample your work. That's basically how we do it. So unlike Audible, where that doesn't happen, we're casting a wider net to where it can. And the reason I throw out the audiobooks, people might feel comfortable jotting things down on a journal, but maybe not putting it in print. But that's where the audiobook comes in. And that can be a creative challenge. You see, think about some of the things you talked about. If there's something that is emotion driven, that could be your outlet. And then you can tap into your crave and see, do I want music to the background of it? Or do I want it just raw and open like a traditional spoken word? That's another level of creativity and a constructive challenge. And literally, I'll tell you this, like when you go in the studio and you go into that box and it's just you and the mic, it is just like, it's a combination of a little bit of nerves and a lot of hype and a lot of excitement because you really are cut off. It's just you and the mic. And so sometimes what's cool is when you're freestyling or just kind of improvising, you're just going with the flow and you just go ahead and say what you need to say, because sometimes we need that. Every time we deliver a message, it might not be with all the smiles. It might not always be that polished. But then when you really sit back and think, and it's like, where are you really trying to go with this? So even if you're talking about something that's raw and hurtful and gut-wrenching, it's like you're acknowledging what you're going through, but you're acknowledging where you're committed to going. And you never know how powerful it can be. Not only for the people that listen, that can be a powerful reminder for you. Like I said before, part of this is speaking with the audience and helping the audience find words that they necessarily can't, but it's also a checkpoint for me. How far have I come, not just as a writer, but as a person? And how far do I need to go? Celebrating what I've been able to do, but knowing it doesn't stop here. But yeah, great question. So yeah, it's neat. Pandora. It's like, I really typed in my name and like, oh, I'm on Pandora. This is pretty dope. Hey, let me do a screenshot. Hey. They're like, wait, I didn't copy and paste it. That's for real. Like, that's like real, and it's cool. And it's like, who would have ever thought? And that's another neat thing about writing is, writing can be traditional. And you still need to have, quote, tradition, because there's, quote, always going to be that traditional audience. There is nothing like turning the page. You can do the ebook. That's cool. But then when you put your words to life, and now you put it in the form of an audio, and so again, you can feed your mind something. You can feed your mind a checkpoint. You can feed your mind, hey, I can sympathize and empathize because I've been there in principle. Maybe not specific, but I've been there. So now I can be more sympathetic and empathetic towards people that I meet. It's pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful. But yeah, it is cool. Like, really, you type my name, like in Pandora, it's like, yeah, my stuff will pop up. It's cool. But those are fun. I'll probably be back in the studio. They're like, when are you gonna come back in the studio? Probably sometime this year. I don't know if I'll continue with the mixtape series or like for some poetry that I haven't released to do that and find like, the cool music backgrounds. But the cool thing is that's a cool problem. Like I can't really make a bad decision, or, like I said, I can't really make a bad decision. And it's like, hey, I'm on Pandora, where are you? Hey, I'm on Tired. I'm like, hey, they recognize it. Actually, it's funny, I tagged them in something, they reposted, I'm like, oh, I didn't say snap. I said something else, but we're grown folks here. It's like, no, but oh, wow, like they really are watching it. Even the day of the Mississippi Festival, I just did a little, hey, I looked on their thing for the Author's Alley, I'm scrolling down, hey, here I am, and then they reposted. I'm like, hey, great, that means more people are gonna come by. Oh gosh, but great questions. What are some other questions that you have, not only just about what I talked about, but just things that are tied into writing or whatever? Like, while we're here, like, please ask. There's no problem with it.
Have you heard or been involved with the Moss storytelling competitions?
I have not. I think for me, right now, I'll probably look at delving into more of those, but I'll tell you what I like. I love doing talks like these because it's intimate and people who might be reserved feel more open to talking and sharing. I love doing book festivals. I think authors should, as best as possible, do as many book festivals. Number one, the people that are there like to read. Number two, it's just a matter of talking with them and saying, here's what I've done. Is it a fit for you, or can it be a fit for somebody else? Having been able to speak at different festivals is cool. One story with Detroit, which is, I haven't done theirs in a while, but Detroit Book City, I'll always remember they did their quarterly series. It was like February 2018 or February 2019. Literally, I flew up on a Sunday morning, went straight to the venue, and what happened is one of the speakers had to cancel, and they're like, hey, would you like the slot? I'm like, are you kidding? Heck yeah, I'd like it. Got there, and I was real creative with how I did my luggage. So of course, did my talk, came back, had people come by the table. The very next day, the bookstore was closed, but they opened up so they could stock my books on the shelves. And lo and behold, I took a photo. It used to be called the Renaissance Center. Now it's GM Chrysler headquarters. So I took a photo. In the background is the Detroit River, and Windsor, Canada is across the way. So I just took a random photo, me being silly in like 10-degree weather, Yale, go outside and take a picture. But what ended up happening is one of the online magazines based out in Los Angeles inboxed me asking if they could use the photo. I'm like, oh yeah, sure, why not? And that is what helped in regards to all of a sudden under their magazine series, getting interviews with their series based in Atlanta, Dallas, Memphis, their podcast series, their spin-offs. So from something as random as a photo on a cold February day, now I wouldn't recommend you guys do that, but just something like that. And again, that came from writing. Now all of a sudden, hey, you have all these interviews and articles. We need to talk to you. I'm like, yes, please do. Love to talk with you. So I think eventually, doing competitions, but right now I like the lane that I'm in regarding the festivals, regarding just book signings, especially like here, like talks at our libraries, our independent bookstores, which have helped so many people, just to build confidence, to know that there's nothing wrong with Amazon and there's nothing wrong with being on Barnes & Noble. There's nothing wrong with those things. But some authors forget there's a universe outside of Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and you have to be open to engaging with people, whether it's 5 or 500. Talk with people. You'll be surprised the number of authors that don't have a press and media kit. You'll be surprised the number of authors that don't do interviews. And my thing is, there's a universe of people out here that don't know you, that need to be aware of who you are and what you're doing. So whether like, this is a fit for me, or they're like, no, this isn't a fit for me, but I know 2 or 3 or 4 other people that have an interest in this and interest in that. So there's nothing wrong with your online platforms. That is helpful and that's part of the puzzle, but we forget. And it comes back to your point, your goal each and every time you write an email is letting people know there's light at the end of the tunnel. So in that spirit, you forget that it's still people oriented. Everybody who walks through the door is important. Every bookstore that allows you to occupy their space, every library, every book club, embrace those and build upon those, and don't forget it's still about connecting with people. Don't get me wrong, a DM is cool every once in a while, a post is cool. I mean, that's cool, but I think there are some that over-rely on that, and you forget there's still people who listen to AM radio. I've done interviews on AM radio. I've done interviews on FM radio. I've done interviews on the newspaper, magazines, and then shifting to, your podcast. I've done those things, and you have to be open to doing a little bit of everything. And it's really about just drawing connections with people, and you can't always do that online. You can't.
Well, I think you'd be good at it if you ever decided to do that.
Thank you. I'll look at the information and yeah, definitely, hey, just have fun with it. Like I said, I just have fun regardless. It's like, wow, I'm meeting people, some people I know, some people I'm meeting for the first time. This is a blessing. It's a blessing right here. Yeah, are there any other questions that people have? Yes?
Is the coffee over there that coffee?
Yeah, so the coffee that's brewing is the medium roast. Now, of course, what happened when I did a talk last Saturday is like the thing flooded. So I had the grinder, I do have the grinder, but I just did like a smaller quantity. So the coffee that's roasting is the medium roast. So I have the medium and the light roast available. And of course, if you like to purchase, I'm making sure you get the glossy bag because they just roasted these a week ago. So yeah, you're getting the freshest batch possible. It says something's been sitting on the shelf for like 5,100 weeks. Yeah. And again, because they're on Gold Cup standard, you are going to need a grinder. So it's the actual beans, you will need a grinder. The grinder that I picked up, that you see right there, I got that from Walmart for like maybe 25 bucks. So if you don't have a grinder, I'd say make sure you have a grinder. And if you use K-Cup, you know how they have the reusable K-Cups? If you already have the reusable K-Cups in a grinder, you're good. Yes. Any other questions that people have? Because like I said, you guys have given some great insight from our opening question. You've asked some great questions, great suggestions. Any other questions that people have?
We thought about doing writing related from words to grinds.
Whereas the grinds, you know what, that might, you know what, I tell you what, if I do, I'm gonna make sure I have your name and credit you, and I'm gonna tell you why. No, real talk, with the coffee, so the hashtag is AuthorASnorton blend. But one of my colleagues was like, hey, you ought to enjoy a sip with Snorton. And I'm like, wait a minute. I actually use that as a hashtag, but in my e-newsletter, I make sure each and every time I post that, I credit the person who made the suggestion. That's what you do. Like all of us can come up with some great ideas, but sometimes there's great, as we heard earlier today, there's great ideas that come from the room. So if I go that direction, I'm making sure to credit today in this conversation, and someone said, you know, from grind to books, I'll make sure I have the verbiage right. And so at some point down the road, I'm gonna be like, this young lady right here was kind enough to be like, you know, like the wise elders, look here, youngster, come here for a minute. Let me talk to you for a minute. Let me talk some sense into you for a minute. Which is what you did so politely, so thank you. Yeah, but that's what's so cool. Like there's always some creativity floating around. You just have to be open to let it come out and embrace it. But yeah.
So be sure to go up there and get a sample of that coffee.
Yeah, please do, and I can always do another little thing in there. So what we'll do is, what I'll make sure to do, because I know that there's already 2 autographed copies of the first 2 books, I'll leave 2 autographed copies of the last 2. If people would like to purchase, that's awesome. We'll go ahead and get you squared away. And of course, every purchase personalized, and I throw, I'll tell you, I throw like autographed pictures in there as well, so you can like frame it and be like, yeah, he looks the same in person. I went to the barbers on Friday, so I kind of look like the same, and things along those lines. But I'd like to say before I turn it back over to folks, thank you, number one, for taking time out of your Thursday to be here. Thank you again to the Wyandotte Public Library, the amazing staff, leadership, all that type of thing. Thank you to Dedra for coming up with the idea. And please make sure, as best as possible, share what you learned today so this series can continue. There's some great talent right here in the midst. So don't get me wrong, there's great authors everywhere, but there's some great creative people in the midst. And who knows, maybe one of you in here might be talking about your writing journey and what you've been able to record or publish. And I know sometimes people say, well, you know, if you have something that you want to write or want to record, it's never too late. That's one of the other beautiful things about writing. The hardest thing is getting started. And technically you can get started anytime. Don't think your age, don't think your choice of words, command of whatever, not. Because we already talked about some of the most powerful writing has come from the simplest statements. Like I said before, I am, we are, Or think about the haiku of 575. It's not a lot of writing, but there can be something powerful in that. And I'll close out with saying, regardless of writing or recording or whatever, all of you in here have a voice. Don't be afraid to use it, and don't let anybody mute it. So I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing with us. And Dedra, thank you again for putting this series together for us. Fantastic.
And again, thank you for allowing us to have the series here. I greatly appreciate it. And I, again, thank you all for coming out. Eventually, you will see me more in front of the camera, because that is one thing I do not like doing, is speaking in front of people.
Get in front of the camera, get in front of the camera.
And so it is a work in progress for me, even though I could be in front of a room full of 5th graders, kids, but sometimes when it's a smaller group, a large group I can do, but a smaller group, I'm still working on it, speaking. So, but I do greatly appreciate you all coming out and just supporting the series, and actually coming out and supporting Andrew. So again, thank you guys again. Please, there's some snacks. I drink coffee plain, and so a lot of times it's great to have like a little Debbie or something sweet to go with it. There's some popcorn, there's some water bottle. And my sister, she's into real estate, so she contributed some goodie bags. So please definitely get one of her goodie bags. I'm a photographer, please get one of my cards. And Andrew has a sign up, so you can stay in touch with him as well. And usually I have some type of sign up, because I would like to stay in touch, and as I continue to do things, or have authors, I can let you guys know who they are, and to come out and support.
Yeah, and on the palm cards, I'll say this, probably the easiest thing, and this is something that I'm using more that's helped me.
The link.
Yeah, Linktree.
Okay,
and I have, for people who are on social media, that's cool, but on Linktree, if you go on that has a directory of everything, like the website, social media, interviews, my e-newsletter, things along those lines. So I would say as a suggestion, go on the link tree that's provided. That way you can look through everything, and then based on the platforms that you use or you want to be aware of, you can go ahead and go from there. So instead of saying all 5,100 things, I'm like, just go there, go ahead and go through what's provided, and then based on what your normal usage is, go ahead and go that route. That would be the easiest thing. All right, so thanks.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, man, I'm glad you came back around. Look at you, look at you. Oh, thank you, thank you.
Oh, okay.
So are you bringing different?
You were gonna get your phone to see the read? Okay.
Last month there was one in Shirley, and she is a children author, and I can be. And
so the things are there. I and we together
her blog. I did a blog.
and also okay, so I was June. I was
friends
to come out.
So you have a monthly?
Yeah, but it's just really simple for right now, because what I found that is
Sure.
but you seem very good.
Oh,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah, I want to get you
Yeah, where do you need
from
very
Yeah.
and the steps that you need to.
I need you to I didn't get you one.
Yeah, sure, let's send it now. So yeah, what I'll do is this, when you put in your mother, my name,
Would you be interested?
Okay, so one of the
sure. This one, once you have a working idea, just let me know. That's fine. So what you can do is, I'm also just gonna put my link tree down here. So what you can do is, based on if you go on my link tree, you can just add me on the platforms that you normally use. And the newsletter that I do, I send it out twice a month. So just send it out maybe like the like just frequently enough, but not So tell me that, what I can do is I can catch you on the next one, it's gonna go out next week. And then, like, especially like, like once you know the date and when you're coming in, once you have the conversations, that way I can get that out there as well.
I don't know what your availability is on Saturday.
Yeah, I just really,
Is it this Saturday? I'm not gonna, probably
so
able to because
so I'm actually doing my master's in fine arts at Appleton, but I went to Georgia State and I got
but yeah, once
my
you
bachelor's.
do this, you got my,
And then I write poetry,
so
I
you
just
got
perform
my
a lot.
email on Linktree where you can pull like other info and
I'm
just.
trying to get back into writing more, but
And once you're aware of different stuff, just shoot it to me.
Because I do have, I have a list of mail. It's like a newsletter. I send out like what the clues are.
I'll tell you what's against the like if you're not.
we went to one, and I know that they had a while ago. It wasn't that one, that, well, I don't know that one, but
That's what I usually use in my head. If you have a database of less than 1,000 emails, it also. That's cool. I would say that you know, that does a solid job for your distribution.
My quality about
I think I have a book that I usually ask people to put their information. So I'm gonna check.
everybody know where
You teach in like
I grew up in Delaware. All my kinfolk, most of them looking embarrassed. And my mom's kinfolk, living shots. Mom used to live in the Blakely, Williamtown. Yeah, he's one of the yeah.
That's what I heard.
One of the ladies at church, we just love it.
That's my daddy's, sister-in-law.
Burn Junior. Yeah, we were growing up in Sunday school, with myself, except up in life.
Yeah.
And we always tease Junior. You would be a great man, but wasn't myself.
One day, Sunday, that's why I hadn't seen Uncle Junior for a long time. I was going to the family dinner, and I felt this tap as I was going to myself. He said, I know you was screwed. I will. Yeah, he said, I knew when you walked about it.
You can imagine when you grow up in an area, people look at you and say, I laugh at my aunt.
that's like one of the things, like you said, is like, I can't.
And my uncle.
That's what I was thinking. It said
Nine times out of 10,
it says resistance. It's like community and for people who like are here and will be here and like just the I don't know. That's just been on my brain a lot lately.
So you should try to do it the first time.
and then I'll like my because like with him, I was okay, fine. I'm finally doing it, so I'm not telling people all these different
Yeah.
things. So they can,
What you have stuff together.
got one of my skills, get some of the goodies, the popcorn, and all that.
No, they can be out here. Yeah, I can do another. I did a small batch, like I said. Somehow the cake but yeah, if I can pour a little bit more that's fine.
I don't know if like,
And the only reason I like it
Yes, ma'am.
well, I know, I'm gonna
then
just.
you
go through the sign?
for everybody.
Okay. He's my cousin. Carla's my cousin. And Carla worked in the library a little bit when she was in high school. You know what?
Yeah, I know.
All of a sudden,
You know what?
Yeah, you never know.
maybe it doesn't.
Well, we used to live in a house across the street.
This one I was very intentional because it was interviews and took my time with all the interviews.
The library was a great place.
I already had the interviews.
Judy always teased me sometimes when I'm in Jefferson. I stop at the library and laugh. I'm in Commerce. I go over there to Homer Library another week. A few months ago, I met the director. She said, Judy, tell her where you been today. I said, well, I've been to Homer, I've been to Commerce, I've been to Jefferson, and now I'm in Washington. Because I went to see my, yeah. It is beautiful. When I was doing like the different pictures of the different people.
We met at one of the
Were you
coffee houses.
Oh, no, you're talking. I'll wait till you get that started. Yeah, because I was sure you needed to grab some of the things.
You're going.
You can get some used to.
Honestly, when I got this,
So,
when I got
and
this.
the real estate girl in there is our first sister on my door.
And that's where this is, you're just right there.
Pass your words on.
It was the night before I covered the Clemson course. So I was on the road in like North Carolina, but I would say change up the location. Because sometimes you're in one spot, you get 2 5 calls, some stuff to change up. And then change up where you ride on, like I said, some stuff you might need to fix. Some stuff you might be ready for idea because it comes on this weekend. Like, don't think there's a one size fits all. Everything you do is gonna have a life of its own. What's gonna happen is all
Yeah, I would say, do you have a website or something?
I'm on Instagram, and I have an email if y'all interested, because we are definitely looking to engage into more and collaborate.
Yeah,
Just from
but
here,
not
I
every
can
work you do is gonna be different. So don't think every time I write something.
Well, I live in Gwinnett and teach in Gwinnett.
That's why it's like the hardest part is getting started. Because I have different great ideas what I do with.
Oh, that's what's up.
And I started like starting with school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just reading an article today that was in the Atlanta paper. I'm always trying to find, I have to find an and I keep finding these negatives, and I can't find people to develop my negatives, because, you know, that's dying art. And I'm reading an article that a gentleman in Atlanta is teaching a class on developing your negatives, because your little SD, these little chips, we don't know how long the memory's gonna last from those, you know? We know what negatives would do, they've been around a long time. So he's trying to, I guess, get more people interested And then the young lady said her grandfather left her camp, so that's how she got interested in my negatives.
And I would say honestly.
On the back of that,
content,
Check your app.
worded, some of it.
Cause like I said, I tell people, the libraries are a great place. People just don't take advantage of, you know, they got so many dynamic resources. Some people just think libraries are books and magazines. The libraries have come a long way when I was growing up, you know. And I don't know why I didn't learn about your series till last week. I said, Julia, how did I miss that? She said, you're moving around too much.
So, and so I'm like, okay, I gotta get with the next group of authors. Every now and then I have like a bunch now. Okay, you know Johnny Smith, right? My mentor, that's, you know, when he passed away, I had to take a moment.
Yeah, that's what,
So speaking of, you probably have these
Bernard.
poems.
Yeah, that's what he said. He said that was my mentor. That was like my second daddy. He said, you know, he taught me so much.
Yeah, so he's the reason for the series. He also had me doing the Georgia Roundtable where I would go to different areas in Northeast Georgia. People would say, okay, we need someone to come out and talk about wills or financial, whatever. So I'll have people who will sponsor me. You're welcome. They'll provide.
Thank you. Closed mouths don't get, closed mouths don't get.
My cousin was now just talking about that last week. It's not even like, there's so many people either don't have a will or they don't know anything about estate planning. And I said, I told him we were talking about one of my cousins was upset because her brother was not having to pay the taxes. And he was saying, Mom and Daddy left this land free and clear. She said, you got to realize it's free and clear for us a mortgage. But to maintain, the state requires you to pay taxes. If you have a house on this property, you got to pay taxes, you got to have insurance, you got to go through state law, you got to go through some local law. So people don't understand it.
They don't, and so
They've already locked the door, the library's closed now, so we'll need to kind of wrap up if we can.